Hello and welcome to this week's Turning Points. This week we return to our interview with Paul Francis, leader of Glenwood Community Church in the east of Cardiff. Last week, Paul told us about the new building that they're opening up, the new extension, the Rotunda as it's called, which will be a wellness centre as part of the church's ministry. This week, Paul talks and reflects about his own ministry, about the ups and downs of church ministry, and something of the last 40 years of Glenwood's life. I'm delighted to be with my good friend Paul Francis.
Lovely to be with you.
Thank you, Paul. And you lead the team, of course, in Glenwood Church.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting in your brand new swanky office in a brand new swanky
building.
Well, extension doesn't do justice to it. Rotunda building.
Rotunda. It's a good word, isn't it? Yeah.
So, Paul, do you want to? But I'm also aware that this is a brand new building with a brand new vision for the community. But Glenwood, been around for 40 years, and it's always had a vision of being much more than just a church for Christians. That is I think his strapline is a church for others.
A community for others.
A community for others.
Yeah.
So do you want us, before we get on to this brand new swanky building, rotunda-shaped wellness centre, tell us, because you've been, maybe a little bit of the history of Glenwood when you joined, and I don't know, some of the features, what makes Glenwood different to lots of other churches in the UK, let alone Cardiff.
Well, up until this new build, it was the oldest church in Cardiff. We had that distinction. The church actually came out of a Brethren background. Some people who were in Macintosh Gospel Hall lived on the community estate, and there was no provision of a church up here. So they decided that they wanted to start to develop a church, and so they started the usual story: 12 people getting together praying. Began to grow a little bit, so they began to meet in Springwood Primary School, just literally 200 metres from here.
Right, yeah.
And they grew there to about 100 actually in this, and that's when I went. I was a student, and I went literally probably 6 months before they started the building work. And so we used to sit they used to have the primary school seats, the little seats, to sit in the seats. And so...
and you were an engineering student, I think.
I was studying civil engineering at that time, yes. And I ended up working for a couple of years as an engineer. And I came back to do a PGCE, to teach maths and PE, believe it or not.
I can see now those rippling muscles.
Those rippling muscles.
And jumper.
And by then the building was up. And the radical thing they'd done with the building was Alf Hark, who was one of the elders, there was 4 elders at the time, and they were deciding what to build. So let's not build the traditional sanctuary, let's build a sports centre which will serve the community. So in its DNA from its beginning, in its birth, was the desire to serve the community. And so therefore they built a building that would help achieve that. So, for those not been, it's a big. It looks like a sports centre from the outside, and nobody wanted that, but an old sports centre. And you could play 5-side football in there. There were badminton courts and netball courts, and they had showers and changing rooms, male and female. Because at that point there weren't any leisure centres, so it was a great success. And I was asked to become become the first youth worker. And so I said I'd do it for a year before I went back to civil engineering. And now here we are.
40 years later.
40 years later, I'm still here. And so it's been a fascinating journey, and it grew rapidly.
Yeah.
And part of that, sadly, was transfer growth.
Yeah, sure. Wow.
With the new kids on the block and all that sort of stuff. And
a lot of students, I guess?
A lot of students back then. We used to have John Lennox, who was still is a great brain, and a great Bible teacher. So he was part of it. Rob Parsons was part of it. So it did attract students, and
the whole care for the family vision, I guess, birthed
out of that.
It
was quite a few years later, but it came out of that, birthing for it. And so we learned some lessons. We became arrogant. We thought we'd cracked church planting. We'd grown rapidly, so we cracked it. And God said, "Oh, there we are. Then I think you need to learn a lesson." We learned the lesson. We're humbled. And I said, never while I'm involved in Glenwood will be arrogant again. Might get other things wrong, but not that.
Yeah.
So it has grown rapidly, and I stayed in youth work for 7 years. And then we began to explore church, and you know as well as I do, Gethin, you know, in the early 2000s, people began to deconstruct church and look at what's church all about, what's it meant to be doing.
Yeah.
And people like Brian McLaren, very influential with me. I read his book, Church on the Other Side, and it changed completely my view on church in that sense. And began to try and work out some of the stuff he was talking about. Which is going to where people are as opposed to expecting people to come to a Sunday service. So out of things like that, Speakeasy Advice Centre was birthed. It gives free advice, legal advice to people. And then we got involved we bought an old Brethren Hall down in Mackintosh Hall and developed that into a centre for homeless people and those at risk.
That's TABS, is that?
That's TABS, that's TABS. And that too, the great thing about this, we've had this project here, which we'll talk about a bit later, but that too, during the same period, grants have come in gifts to completely refurbish it and have a new start as well. So that's great as well. And
is that what makes Glenwood different, Paul? Because I always think in its culture, how you go about things, it's not the same as virtually any other church I know, and it's not because of size. I know you're a larger church, but it's not just that. You seem to have lots of I'm not even sure what to call them really, but you've got lots of, I'd call them social enterprises. You know, you're very big on arts, music, the homeless. Is that it feels like a deliberate plan on your part?
I'd like to say it was a deliberate plan. I'd like to say I was that strategic in my thinking, but I don't think it's that. I just think that. There are strengths and weaknesses of people's personalities, aren't they? And one of my strengths, which is also a weakness, I have a very eclectic brain. I'm dyslexic, so therefore I cannot think sequentially. So when I prepare a talk, it's quite painful for me because you just can't think linearly and 1, 2, 3. But what you do have is lots of left field ideas. And so part of it came out of that, frankly. But also recognising in other people that, they've got a gift for that. Let's help them. So it wasn't an intentional plan. It's more intentional now in terms of what we're doing. But it really was motivated a lot by that reading of that book, The Church on the Other Side, in terms of meet people where they're at and create spaces where people can meet. So that's where it came from. And we got some things right, and we have got some things wrong. You know, we did church in a pub.
I remember that.
Yeah, which was great, and saw its life cycle come to an end, and you know we haven't done that since, but it was good.
But you've also had huge kind of impact on, and I know it's an interest of yours anyway, but kind of spoken word stuff, worship, performing arts. I can't remember the name of it. Was it Big Ideas? No?
Big Ideas.
It wasn't Big Ideas.
Going public?
Going public. Big Ideas is somebody else.
Big Ideas. Gary Smith.
That was Gary Smith. That's not good. But that, you know, so you've, over a long period of time, you've made a point of not being stuck in this building. You pushed, and you reached, especially with those schools and young people who've never normally come to a church. I love about issues that they want to talk about.
Yeah, I love creative arts. So, like you creative arts. So, you know, I just love any art form, and so therefore, you know, if we can use it in communicating with people, because people, you know, all of us make the mistake to think that everybody can learn from a didactic talk. Somebody talks, somebody from the front, 3 points, you know, everybody hears what you're saying. It's not true. There are different ways people learn, you know, and kinesthetic movement, touch, feeling, you know, smell, all these things are the way people learn, and you've got to incorporate them all. And I mean, the Bible is 80% prose and stories, and Jesus, most of what he taught was story-based. So it's and you're quite right, for schools, I don't do schools work anymore, but the teams still do schools work, and they use all forms, drama, music, to communicate, really.
And for a long time you had had ownership of the gate, but I mean that became part of Glenwood's orbit, didn't it? I mean, I appreciate that probably had ups as well as, or downs as well as ups.
It certainly did.
But I mean, that, if ever there was a kind of demonstration of a vision to reach people way beyond standard Christian stuff, and that's it, isn't it?
Well, it's funny because we went through a season in the 1990s, a phase of something called 2,000 churches by the year 2000. It was planting churches.
Yeah.
And so we did church plant, actually. So we church plant to Pentwyn, we church planted to Penellan, and out of that came a plant down to Roath. And the one in Roath was we hired an old Presbyterian church. Which became the Gate, obviously. Yeah. But it was old. I mean, it needed a lot of work to it, and it came up for sale, and we decided we would buy it. And at that point, I was on the trust that bought it. It was part of Glenwood. John Loosemore was the chair, and did a fantastic job. And it transformed into an art centre. Yes. And I'd stood off the trust at that point because no bad reason whatsoever. It was just too much time doing other things. But 3 years after I started it, and tragically when Rob Lacey had died,
yeah, of course,
they asked if we'd go and help run it. So we took it on, and it's probably been the most challenging period, one of the most challenging periods of my life, because creative arts, it's very, very hard to make it work financially. Very hard. But the good news is, I did it for 10 years. I was chair of the trust for 10 years, and it was hard work. But the great news at the moment is the Gate Arts Centre is doing well. Yes. And under the current trusteeship, it's doing a great job. Yeah.
So Paul, you talked about the Brian McLaren book. Was it called Church on the Other?
Church on the Other Side.
Church on the Other Side. So and we haven't rehearsed this interview at all, so you don't know what's coming.
No,
but I'm just wondering, as you look back, as you reflect, what, without going into details, what have been the really tough periods in that 40 years when?
It'd be easy to say which have been the good periods. No, that's not true.
But I mean, just the kind of issues that have sparked controversy in the church, but have been hard. And maybe the churches, sometimes you grow out of these things, sometimes you can shrink out of these things. But you've done, you're a standing church, but I know you're bound to have had a few moments.
A few, at least. Well, it's a good question, actually. I think when I was 17 or 18, I'd just become Christmas 16. I picked up an LP and listened to the speeches of Martin Luther King.
Oh yeah.
And I have a dream.
Yeah.
And it just ignited something in me. And back then, social action, as you call it now, was probably an anathema to churches.
Yeah.
They'd say the preached word was the only way, and if you gave someone a cup of water, you certainly preached the gospel at the same time. And so therefore, that had been a battle with churches, and we're forever grateful to people like Tony Campolo, who flew the flag for that, really.
And so you've had a long relationship with him?
Yeah, we have, fortunately. Actually, he's been fantastic to us. So that was certainly a difficult period. I think deconstructing church, can be painful.
Yeah.
And there are dangers to it, So that was a good journey. Clearly, the big one is sexuality and gender. Yeah. And that's still ongoing. Yeah. It's still a big one.
How are you navigating that? Because that's an issue, because it makes it sound like an academic thing. We're trying to reach out to groups of people who historically have not been welcome in church. And I know Glenwood, in Ararat and other churches were trying to do it differently.
Yeah.
But that's not an easy.
It's not an easy to walk. And I would say I want Glenwood to be inclusive. But if you talk to people from who want or gay or whatever gender, they will say unless you are for gay marriage, it's not totally inclusive. And I understand that. I do understand that and agree with it, And we're on that journey. We're not there yet. Steve Chalk, who I've listened to, got a lot of respect for.
He's been here a few times.
He has been here a few times. Yeah, he has actually. And he's a great communicator. And, I know it's controversial. But I think he's done a remarkable job down the years with what he's been doing and still doing, actually. So it's a difficult one. We have conversations with people forever talking about it. But it is a difficult area. It is a challenging area, actually.
And because I know, Glenwood, where Glenwood sits within Churchlife in Cardiff, it's a prominent, and through, you're very much, I know you wouldn't say this of yourself, Paul, but you have an apostolic kind of role in the city and beyond. And so, as you if you steer a direction, particularly into that issue, into that area of sexuality, gender, sexual orientation, that immediately, there's a whole group of people out there at the churches will think, no, that's you've lost the plot. You've lost the plot. You're not a Christian anymore. Whatever. The lovely things that people can say.
And some people just don't want to discuss it. You try a discussion, and I remember you said we're friends with Campolo, and not last time, the time before when it was over, I met with him and said, just because he changed his position from, his wife has always been in support of gay marriage.
Yes.
For many years he was for gay celibacy, but latterly he's moved to supporting gay marriage, and I asked him why, and typical Campolo, an hour later, he'd worked through this sociologically why, he'd worked historically why, and he worked biblically why. And he said, Paul, it's easy for me, I'm 80, I can say what I want at the moment now. He says, and I may be wrong, but he says, I don't think I am, but I may be wrong, and at some point you have to put your head above the parapet. And it's a challenge. It is a challenge, actually. It really is a challenge. And I still haven't got the answer. No. Still haven't got the answer.
Well, bless you for being so open about it. And I guess there have been other flashpoint issues for you as well. I think, wasn't Glenwood, I remember there was a series of books. Mark Europe, they brought there was a series of 10, I think you were in that, you 10 something, were you, the worshipping church?
10 worshipping church, but that's the period where I said we became arrogant. I mean, why Glenwood would think it's a worshipping church when you got, in terms of, back then what worship meant was sung worship, not the broad definition of worship. We just thought, how on earth did that happen? Type thing to me. So it has, and obviously recently, we've been looking at the whole issue of race and white privilege, and we interviewed Les for our online service, black church leader down here. And he was fantastic actually, and the church, there is racism in the church without a shadow of doubt, and we need to stand against it.
Well, there was a panorama programme just over a week ago, and that was more about the Church of England, but I mean it was quite painful. A painful view, and I'm sure the mirror they was held up there would apply to any church, any one of us.
I totally agree actually.
And again, many thanks to Paul for being so open and honest and funny. Our next turning point is a guided meditation from our very good friends at Pray As You Go. So again, fire up the imagination, close your eyes, and tune in to another Bible passage, an encounter with Jesus.
Imaginative contemplation is a way of getting to know and even meeting Christ in the Gospels. The ultimate goal is personal encounter with Him. Take your time with this kind of prayer. God is in no rush. Take whatever time you need to settle into this prayer. You can always press pause if you need longer at any point. First, we familiarize ourselves with the passage.
Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, and by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came, walking towards them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And then they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
The scene is close to the Sea of Galilee, towards the end of a long day. Jesus and the disciples have just fed over 5,000 people. Earlier they learned of the violent murder of John the Baptist. They are ready for a peaceful end to their day. Jesus feels a need for prayer. The disciples are going to cross the Sea of Galilee. Imagine Jesus leading the disciples into a boat. Place yourself among them. You might be one of the disciples, in their shoes, as it were. Or perhaps you are wearing your own shoes as yourself, and yet with them. Who are you? Look at the crowd slowly dispersing. At the lake in the evening light, the boat, the other disciples, the sky. Listen to the sounds, too. The crowd, the water lapping on the shore, Jesus organizing you into the boat, sending the crowds away. Smell the air. Perhaps the aroma of bread and fish coming from the feast that has recently taken place. Feel the breeze, quite a strong one tonight coming from the lake. After pushing out the boat, perhaps you take an oar and begin to pull the boat out into the lake. It's heavy going. You notice Jesus sending the last of the crowd away, then making his way up the hill to pray. It's some time later, and you have not made the far shore. The wind is strong and against you. It's a struggle. Then a shocking experience as you notice a figure coming towards you, walking on the water. What is the reaction on the boat? You hear the person speak from afar. "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." You realize it is Jesus. How are you affected by this event? Peter issues his challenge. "If it is you, tell me to come to you across the water." And Jesus says, "Come." You watch as Peter steps out of the boat and onto the water. He begins to walk to Jesus. Feeling the wind and seeing the waves, he takes fright and begins to sink. "Lord, save me!" Jesus catches his hand and holds him. "Why did you doubt?" The story continues, but before that, is there anything else you want to do here? Do you want to step out like Peter and walk to Jesus on the water? Do you want to catch the eye of Jesus? Do you want to speak to him or to look at him? Take whatever time you need to go where you are drawn to go. What is your response to this Jesus who walks on water and commands the wind? Take whatever time you need to be with Jesus in this scene. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.